What's up, everybody? Welcome to Salty Runback, here to be your weekly intake of North American Developmental League of Legends. We are here for our first full-length episode with the start of the NACL regular season just 4 days away. I'm Andrew Grapesout. That's Ben Hawkins. Hawk, how are we doing today? The first episode.
Grapes, I am doing so amazing. I'm so excited. We've been putting in so much work on the front end for this. I know, it's just amazing to be finally recording. I was eating my lunch today, and I was just thinking to myself, hey, I'm not getting enough salt. So now I'm getting that salt. I can raise my cholesterol levels a little bit. I think that's something that happens with salt. I don't know. But it's great to be here. I'm so excited.
If you're looking for the hard-hitting analysis, that is what is going to be on this show. Just tons of salt puns. That's basically all we're going to be able to provide. But yeah, this is the first episode of Salty Runback. It is a podcast covering both the North American Challengers League and the North American Challengers League qualifiers. And there's a lot of them out there at this point, so we're going to try to differentiate ourselves a little bit here with the way things are formatted. If you didn't catch our preview video that dropped this weekend, the show is going to be a little bit different than just your standard run-of-the-mill talk about things for a couple of hours. So the goal is to get everything to you guys and out of the door in about an hour or less. Of course, if we do happen to go over, we're not going to be cutting our conversations in any way, but we just want to make sure we get all the information to you. Yeah, in about an hour in a quick, digestible way. So the way we're going to be doing that is splitting our show up into two main parts. Each of them are going to last about a half an hour. The first half is our headlines portion, where we're going to cover the 5 or so most important stories of the week and get you up to speed on anything like some exciting matchups you might have missed or some new signings that occurred. Just basically anything that you would need to know in order to stay up to date on everything revolving the NACL. Now, the second half is where things are going to get a little bit more spicy. We'll have a different activity or segment each week that will hopefully get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of some of the specific topics within the scene. We might be interviewing a player at some point. We might have some playoff predictions if that's the kind of time that we're getting around, or maybe something else. Again, if you want to let us know some different ideas, let us. You can shoot us comments in any of our social media platforms. We're releasing this episode on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, as well as live premiering it via Watch Party on Twitch, which is a pretty exciting format. If you're there, hello. Pop an emoji in the chat or something if you want.
But can I get poggers in the chat?
We're doing this and like it's 20. We're asking for chat messages 24 hours in advance.
Yeah.
Because when the show comes out tomorrow, that is when the chat message is going to come through. But again, super excited about the second part because that's when we get to be a little bit more creative. Today we're going to be tier listing all 16 NACL teams based on how much we like the roster construction. And make sure to stick around for that because I took a look at your list earlier, Hawk, and I think we're going to have a couple of things that we disagree on pretty heavily.
Contrary to popular belief, Grapes and I do not share the same brain cell when it comes to how we feel about the team. So we do have some differences of opinion. We're going to have some good discussion. You're not going to want to miss that.
There's more than a couple of brain cells that that we have together. So, a couple of them go to you, a couple of them go to me. That's just kind of how things work.
We share where we can, but we also try to be independent. We're like in a long-term committed relationship, but we haven't moved in together.
Whoa.
I'm gonna stop talking.
That was not where I was going in this conversation.
I gotta clip that and send it to my girlfriend. Anyway, this episode will mostly be about NACL, but the overall podcast, we do hope for it to be about both the NACL and the NACLQ. But, with the NACL starting next week and the NACLQ not starting for another week, for this one in particular, we are going to be focusing mainly on the big league. But if you are a fan of NACLQ, that will be coming up in the future. So you're not going to want to miss that coverage. But, Grapes, I think without any further ado, should we get into our headlines for the week?
I think it's about time. Let's swap that scene over. Time for the headlines portion of the first episode of Salty Runback. There we are. Oh, wow. You kind of just did it on the fly like that. That was impressive.
I'm learning production.
Hawk is doing all the production behind the scenes. Shout out to him. But yeah, here's the 5 questions, our brand new overlay. And we can get started with the first topic, which I think is a pretty important one here, Hawk. The NACL is getting a completely new look based in comparison to what Academy was like in 2022. For those of you unfamiliar, there are now 10 challenger teams, not academy teams, that will be competing in the NACL alongside 6 provisional teams, which were previously the best 6 teams in the amateur circuit or the PGCQ. They're going to be playing in a single round robin best of 2 regular season, followed by a playoff system that is very, very similar to Proving Grounds. And down in the qualifier system, we will have a very similar format, just some of those top teams and top players that would have been in amateur last year are going to be in the NACL. But the big important thing is the promotion relegation system that happens at the end. The top 4 points earners in the qualifiers will play against the bottom 4 NACL provisional teams, not challenger teams, to determine who deserves to be in the NACL next split. All the games will be on weekends. It will be kind of one after the other. The NACLQ will be first, and then after that, the broadcast will roll into the NACL. So, Hawk, first question of this show. How are you feeling about the format?
So I feel like the most important thing to mention about all these changes is that this change is, I feel like, objectively amazing for all the players that have been at the top of amateur, maybe for a little while, or they weren't quite able to get into academy, and now they're going to be able to play against academy teams much more consistently than just getting swept once out of Proving Grounds and not play against them again. They'll get to develop alongside them. A lot of them are moving to Los Angeles as well. So I think that based on that alone, like, this is a great change for sort of the upper echelon of amateur and what was academy. Now these challenger tier players as well, they're just going to get more reps against more different players that are going to push them in different ways.
Yeah, I think that's a really exciting point. I think also, which is something that we are going to discuss a little bit later, is that now there's teams that have different purposes of being built. Of course, you have the challenger teams who aren't going to get relegated ever, and they could focus a little bit more on roster development and players that might fit the LCS system down the line. And on the other end, you're going to have these challenger teams that are really, really motivated to win, because if they don't finish top 2 out of the provisional teams, they are going to be sent to that relegation tournament. They have the opportunity to not be in the NACL next year. So I think some of the rosters that we're going to see from provisional teams are going to look a little bit different, and that they are going to be super hungry and ready to try and compete to win as many games as possible to make sure that they stay in the league.
Right. And I mean, just have that opportunity to try to fight to stay in the league, even though, yes, they have the opportunity to get relegated. Hey, going to the relegation tournament doesn't mean you're not in NACL next split. It's important to mention, but it just means that these players are going to have a whole split of essentially what we used to think of as academy experience. Like, yes, the overall mean quality of the league will be slightly lower just because there's more players. I think that will elevate the quality of the league as a whole, and eventually it'll balance out. And having the opportunity for relegation too, that does mean these NACLQ teams can also rise up. If some of them end up being really, really good, they can get promoted and they can play at this level. But Grapes, I do think this does segue. I think it's fair to say this is a little bit worse for the lower level amateur teams, which, it is fair to say, I think in PGCQ a lot, and in the way the Proving Ground system worked, we were already a little bit focused on sort of those top 6 to 10 amateur teams with the Proving Ground system. So it's not that much worse, but it is slightly worse because you don't have the PGCQ system anymore.
This is something that I talked a little bit about with Colomer a couple of days ago. Essentially, at this point, the best team in NACLQ would have been the 7th best team, theoretically, in the previous PGCQ system. So that's a team that gets knocked out in the quarterfinals
in the Gulag.
Or something. Yeah. Throughout the tournament. So in terms of the strength of the NACLQ, the quality of the teams might be going down a little bit this year. Of course, I think at the, that having that at the cost of maybe a better, higher tier ecosystem, that's just kind of the conversation that you have to have. I think overall, it's really good for some of these players towards the top. And then for the players that aren't at the top, it might be easier to get up there, but, during that year of being in the NACLQ, the level of competition probably won't be as high as it was last year.
And last point I want to make before we can get into the last sort of segment of this question is, like, the one thing I want to say, though, is I feel like at this point, a lot of the players are going to be playing NACLQ. Like, most of them are going to be sort of those players that we'd expect to be, like, slightly lower level amateur players, the ones that need a little bit more time to develop. So, yeah, there will be some players like Fnatic, right, that are in NACLQ, and it's like, wow, I can't believe they're not playing in NACL. But if I feel like it'll be easier for them to make it more clear, individual players, like, that they could be picked up to NACL because there's more slots available later on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, definitely.
So even though it's a little bit worse for NACLQ, I don't think it's a lot worse, and I think it's outweighed by how much better it probably is for the ecosystem as a whole. But that's all on the player side, Graves.
Yeah, and the other thing, really quickly, which kind of segues into this next point, is that I think the time slot is a really interesting change as well. Obviously, with LCS moving to Thursdays and Fridays, the NACL and the NACLQs will be moving to Saturday and Sunday. Now, this means a couple of things. First of all, for the amateur teams, is a really good change for them because a lot of players and staff are normally at school or have other things that they do, like in terms of jobs and
Throwback
stuff
to
like
me
that.
skipping class for PGCQ.
Oh, no, exactly. I mean, for us, for me and you, Hawk, as current enrolled students in university, this is a great change for us to watch all the games because, you know, we don't have to skip class anymore to try to make the broadcast here and there. So that's a really interesting point as well. But the kind of cost that this comes at, in a way, is that because they are both NACL and NACLQ are on the same day, the way that the qualifiers broadcast is constructed is going to be a little bit different. Of course, this is just coming from us specifically who have this experience of being broadcasters in the space. But Rally Cry, the new TO for the NACLQs, is going to be streaming things very differently than Unified did in 2022. Who, you know, say what you want about Unified and the way that their some of their financial decisions were constructed in the past couple of years.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, the way that their broadcast was formatted, and Hawk, I think you can kind of agree with me as people who were on it, was really
It was
good.
It was really good.
There was a nice vision,
and there was a lot of talent, you know, too, in that as well.
There was a lot of different people, but somehow we all came together and kind of created a really unique vision. I think the show of PGCQ that was on Mondays and Tuesdays felt very different from both LCS and Academy on the other days of the week, and that's going to change this time around with NACLQ being just basically a pre-show for NACL. The broadcast is going to be 3 hours before NACL, so it starts at 10 a.m. Pacific time, which, you know, kind of sucks for all of us gamers who have these horrid sleep schedules. Might have to fix some of that here and there. But also, not all of the games are going to be streamed by Rally Cry. The official team, in terms of broadcast, is getting pretty heavily reduced. Of course, not all that information has come out just yet, but, you know, it opens the door for more team streams and the like, which, you know, was a really good place for amateur casters like myself and Hawk to get started back in 2021. But for people who were on that unified broadcast last year, maybe not as good of a change. And of course, coming at the cost of player success and everything. Obviously, for the most part, you would take, you know, that over broadcast health in a way. But in order to make these games exciting and to make these storylines things that people and fans want to follow, I think having like a very specific broadcast direction is important, and I think we're losing a little bit of that here at the cost of some of these new changes that might be more beneficial for the players.
Basically, like TLDR on all the changes is, first of all, the main NACL broadcast will probably be the same, if not hopefully a little bit better than it was last year. And not to say that it was bad last year. That's just like, hopefully it continues to improve. It was great last year. As opposed to Academy. But the PGCQ broadcast, as we've sort of known it, is very much going away, or at least being significantly trimmed down. And you know, whether or not that just is how it is. And so it is tough, but also, again, this is a really great change for players in a lot of cases as well, and there will be those team streams, so it's not like NACLQ won't be covered. It just is going to be less broad in scope as PGCQ was last year.
And if you are a new caster or somebody who wants to get involved in the broadcasting scene, make sure that you try to find some of these unstreamed games to cover, to cast. That's a really great way to get your resume here. Yeah, you know, pending, we will have a couple of these unstreamed games here on Salty Runback on our Twitch channel as well. Not all the details have really been worked out with that, so might be a bit of a leak if you are watching our first episode at this point. But that is kind of where things are at with the broadcast. Overall, good for definitely the players at the top, and we're going to have to see how things kind of turn out for everybody else involved. But overall, I like that Riot is making some of these changes, and I'm excited to see how they work out in 2023. Now, I think that's enough about the format changes, Hawk. Let's move on to our next question, which is more about the players that, you know, have made it into NACL. Which one of these 80 players that are on these 16 NACL teams will be the first player to get promoted into the LCS. This could be via like a benching, a random promotion. You should consider some of the LCS teams that are involved with this as well. What are we thinking? Who's making that LCS debut first?
Yeah, so Grapes, I read this question, right? And immediately, this is not flame to anyone that's playing on a challenger team or in the NACL, but I immediately am thinking of like what team or player in the LCS is going to fall apart really quickly and need to call somebody up. Like that's my criteria for this question, especially when I look at first benching. Because we haven't really heard too much from any of the LCS teams as well that are going to be really big on subs. You know, there's not like a 2018 Cloud9. And for me, it really obviously points to TSM. Well, not really obviously. I think it could, that was so flame. It could be a lot of teams, but just, you know, last year we saw a lot of roster carousel from TSM. TSM is also on their challenger roster. They've picked up 3 like boomers for their roster, which signals to me that they're not confident in the starting roster. And I think in particular, I'm looking at the fact that they have a former MVP jungler backing up an import jungler, and I could see if Boogie does not work out, they bring him down to challengers, and Svenskeren gets the call up to LCS. So I'm putting my money on Svenskeren. I could also honestly see it being Hanser behind Solo, or I could see it being Wild Turtle behind Neo. Honestly, anyone on this roster, and there are other players, and that's not to flame anyone on TSM or in the org, but it is just like, I think it's fair to say that this TSM roster is still not going to be at that level that maybe TSM fans would want. I think they're not going to be awful, but I think they're going to struggle to find themselves at the top of the table, and with that, and with them having imports as well, I could see them trying out some new things in the season with some of these more experienced players that they have.
I have a lot of mixed feelings about this TSM Challengers roster. As somebody who got into League in 2016 and was the biggest Hanser stan in the world, this feels really good and bad for me at the same time.
Yeah.
I think the fact that these players, I think it's been kind of revealed, are going to be remote the entire time and not really in the facility is kind of where I'm really not sold on them caring too much about this challenges team. But I do agree, if things go wrong in the LCS, you know, they have Hanser, Svenskeren, Wild Turtle. I mean, they all have won LCS with TSM before. Sticking them in not only is great fan service, but also could be a potential improvement depending on how things go. But I think we're just going to really have to see how much this TSM Challengers team really does care and how much effort they're going to be putting in to see really how good they will be down the line. A player that I have that could be the first to be promoted to LCS is a little bit different in terms of methodology for me, but I have Copy out of CLG Challengers.
I had Copy on my short list as well.
I think,
I'm high on Copy.
I think Copy is very, very good. The past 2 years, he's been, I think, considered for LCS opportunities in multiple different teams in multiple different iterations. I know Cubby was calling for him to replace Fudge at the beginning of 2022 after Fudge had a bit of a middling level of success on Cloud9. But Copy, I think, is a pretty high quality LCS mid laner. I think him and Palafox are probably pretty even, honestly, in skill at this point in time. And I think CLG, the LCS squad as a whole, is a really interesting case study to look at as a team that really that is keeping all 5 of their members in a league that, you know, I think overall we can say that every single LCS team has, I think, is going to look better than they did last year. I think any of these 10 teams would have probably made playoffs in 2022 just if they were, you know, slotted in as that additional team out of some of the other rosters that were, you know, not as good last year. We'll just say that.
Right. And especially CLG to me is sort of one of those teams that's like a more than the sum of their parts kind of team. I feel like that was in a way how they were described in last summer as well. And so if one of those parts starts maybe getting a little rusty or something, and that's not to say it's going to be Palafox, I definitely could see Copy is one of those players. I think Jenkins as well are sort of those players that like you really easily, it's like they've played, or Jenkins has played in LCS before. Copy's been in Academy for forever. You could probably put them in. I am impressed to know that Cubby thinks that Copy could have stacked up against top 5 mid jungle in the world, Inspired and JoJo Pune, if he had played on Cloud9.
He's not even here to defend himself, man. One shot. He was one of our first Twitter followers too.
Look, I know. Look, I needed it to be known. I say this in jest. That is still one of my top 5 favorite like NA tweets of all time. So shout out Cubby. I love that tweet to death.
Yeah, and going back to this a little bit, I think that Palafox is very good, and I think that he probably will be, you know, not bottom tier. I don't think he's going to be a bottom tier LCS mid laner.
But he's not going to be above mid tier though.
I think he'll probably be somewhere in the middle. And if CLG doesn't end up, you know, working as well as they might have thought that they could have, especially with some of these new rosters like Dignitas and FlyQuest coming in. I could definitely see Copy, being that kind of swap that might work, especially just looking at the rest of the team. He seems like the most key to maybe fit into that LCS lineup.
Yeah, and we have seen in the past too that they're, sometimes when rosters struggle, it doesn't matter if the player is actually better, but sometimes just switching a player can kickstart a roster and give him sort of that jump that they need.
But saw it with Doka last year.
Yeah, exactly. We should probably move on to the next question. We are running a little bit behind on time. There are other players that we think could sub in, but those I think are the two that we're the highest on. Grapes, question number 3. You want to read it out for the people?
Yeah, here we go. Out of the all the LCS players, there are NACL players. There's a bunch of new blood here, especially with the addition of 6 new provisional teams. Out of them all, which new NACL player who did not play in Academy last year are you most excited to see? Can I go first on this one? Is that all right?
Yeah, go for it, Grace. Go for it.
I think General Sniper obviously is an obvious choice. I don't know if we have to talk too much about him. I just want to get that out of the way. Like, Sniper is going to be very good. He will almost certainly be an LCS in 2024 if things don't go horrendously wrong. Yeah. But another player I want to give a quick shout out to here is Winston. He is on AoE Esports as he was last year. I'm not sure if he's going by Winnie or Winston. I think it's Winnie, actually, so thank you for correcting me, Hawk. But this is actually the first, even though he's been in and out of the Academy system here and there, this is the first time that Winnie will actually be in LA, able to play on low ping. In TSM Academy in 2020 summer, he was basically the second best Academy jungler at 90 ping. And after that, never really got an opportunity in Academy again. And now, even though he's not technically on an Academy team, he gets to play against all of the Academy teams in a regular season. He's been touted as the king of amateur for the past 2 years and has looked really, really dominant on whatever team he has been on, whether it's AoE or otherwise. And so I'm really excited to see him get this opportunity on a team that I think is going to be one of the better provisional teams here in this NACL season.
Look, Grapes, I just gotta say, I fucking love Winnie so much. I think if you're looking at, like, quote unquote new player for a provisional team, Winnie should be who you have your eyes on. I also think if you're looking for, like, the next LCS stud, Sniper and APA are probably who you should have your eyes on. You're someone that's just like, I want to look for the next NA talent, the next big thing. It's probably Sniper and APA. However, I actually went a different direction with this question because I like people like Sniper, APA, now Doxa getting promoted to challenger level teams. They've gotten a lot of attention, and for good reason. But I want to give a shout to Kim Down, the support for Team Liquid Challenger, teammate for APA, a player that I think was fair to say one of the best parts of this UCI lineup for a long time in collegiate. Had a lackluster year with the team as a whole in 2022.
But they're all right.
They were decent, but they only made group stage once out of 4. They tried all 4 times.
Right.
So.
I was thinking more top 8 out of CLOL.
Oh, okay. Yeah, top 8 out of CLOL is pretty good. And they lost to Bay State, who made the finals too. So like overall decent season for UCI. But Kim Down, I think, is a player that was one of the best. It was I think Kim Down and Duong Pro were sort of the big factors on that team for
You're not a cinnamon bread stand, huh?
No, don't get me wrong. Cinnamon's good too, but like I look at, like, jungle support, moving around, making plays a lot of the time, and also Kim Down comes into the Team Liquid tryouts, then looks pretty good, and even though there were some swapperoonies with Team Liquid at support position, I think it's been proven time and time again that Team Liquid is an organization that knows how to develop talent. They've won Proving Grounds. What is it? 3 splits in a row now. They promoted 3 players to LCS in this past offseason, and now they clearly see something in Kim Down, and I believe that that's for a reason. I know a lot of people, and at Grapes, I think you're one of them, they rate Kim Down a little lower individually, and I think that's fair. I don't think Kim Down's going to be like a top 3 support in the league. Like, I just don't think that's the case. But I think if I'm looking at a player that I'm excited for getting a shot, and I think that the organization could see something in, it's Kim Down.
I am not as high on Kim Down as you are, Hawk. I think that there's probably one of the bigger reasons that he was promoted is the fact that he does speak Korean and it works well in that TL ecosystem. Not that I'm saying that that's the only reason that he's, on this team in any sense, but
that's fair. But that also means, you can learn from Core JJ. Like, Core JJ trained Ayla.
If he can learn from Core JJ, that's going to be a really interesting thing.
And he's got Arrow by his side too, as a veteran ADC. Like,
yeah, and especially considering you look at the support pool for North America, there's a lot of memes about it. It's not necessarily the best. So somebody like Kim Down here who can potentially really show up, I think will be a really cool option here. But that's sort of the players that we're looking at. If you haven't been following amateur, maybe as maybe some people that you could look at as really standing out in academy. In NACL this year. But that's going to bring us to our next question, which we'll be talking about those said qualifiers. Only a few of these NACLQ teams have been announced, so we're not going to be doing any leaks or anything like that. But overall, Hawk, out of the teams that have been announced, which one is your early favorite to get promoted over one of the provisional teams in just a couple of months?
So I'm going to pull up the rosters right now just so everyone can see. This is, as of the time of recording, the 6 rosters that we know of, which is obviously not very many. And I think...
Is it not 7?
The 7 rosters that we know of at the time of recording. I said that last.
Math is not our strong suit, apparently, here.
I'm a bird. And so this is the 7 rosters that we know of at the time of recording. And to me, looking at this, it's between, I think, Native Gaming and Maryville. You know, we talked about before that 7th best team is the new best team. Last year, I think that was Maryville. And even though the roster looks a little bit different, it is still Maryville, and it's also very similar in a lot of ways. So I'm looking at this team to be very good, especially early on, because they've been playing together. They crushed LA Comic-Con. They were big at HughFest as well. This is a team that I'm looking at that I think is going to sort of be the team to beat early on in NACLQ. And then also looking at Native Gaming, I just feel like as far as like pure talent upside, it's Native Gaming. And Colomer called me his favorite for saying I was excited about Native Gaming, so I need to stick with that.
Yeah, I think a lot of the community sentiment right now is that Native Gaming will be probably the best team overall, like kind of hands down in this NACLQ system. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, especially for like the first tournament that's happening, which is I think why Colomer kind of said Hawk might have been his favorite a little bit earlier on social media. Follow us on Twitter, by the way. But if you take a look at the Native if you take a look at the Native Gaming roster right now, Fnatic and Scooped, I think, are the 2 best players that have been announced to an NACL team so far. Shocky and Messages are, you know, a little bit more question marks to me. Obviously, Messages has smurfed really hard in Champions Queue, as well as the Native Gaming tryouts that I have casted just a couple of months ago.
And I do want to interject on this too. Like, Messages came out in 2021 and looked really good on a otherwise mediocre team. If you're someone that's like excited about the next generation of NA talent and mid laners, Messages is a name you probably should know. He's a very mechanically talented player, so this is sort of a time to prove it, I think.
Right. I think overall he had some good flashes, but was never necessarily like the star player in PGCQ, which is why I kind of have some questions about him, as well as Shocky, who is a very new player. I believe he's 17 years old. He had a lot of really aggressive champions in his pool, things like Camille and Fiora, which I think can work really well, but also we just have to see him play against some of the more experienced top laners up here, like you're looking at Niles, Dragoon, even Izo up in the top lane. And this, I made this comment to Colomer before he announced that Rhino was on this team. I think Rhino does make this team a lot better than some of the other players that they were considering in their tryouts. But overall, I don't think that they are necessarily... I think they have the highest ceiling out of these teams, but I don't think they're necessarily the favorites, especially in that first tournament. Some other teams that I do want to shout out really quickly, because I know we are running pretty long on time, are Supernova and Team Ambition. I am a big Cozy stan. I am a big Dragoon stan. I think Detro is also really good down in the support role. He was basically the backup, but almost kind of interchangeable with Kim Down on UCI last year. And I think that those pieces specifically are really exciting.
Yeah, all the other teams definitely have pieces that they can play around. I mean, Horizon, right? They've got Sofa Sage and Dragonman Kim, a pretty good bot lane that was top 2 CLOL for Bay State. Super Sunshine, as you said, they have Izo. They've also got Clyde down there in support. Team Ambition, Town, Aaron. Like, all these teams have players that they can play around for sure. It just, to me, feels like Native Gaming and Maryville are going to be the early contenders, and especially Maryville, I think, is going to be the earliest contender. But Grapes, last thing I want to say before we move on as well, it's looking like we're going to be moving towards an ADC jungle-focused meta in 2023, at least early on. Like, lots of junglers just coming bot, winning the game through bot lane, and if that could really favor Native Gaming. But also, Scary Jerry, a nobody at the beginning of 2022, at the end of it, after CLOL, very much a somebody. So keep your eye on those 2 bot lanes, but let's get in to our last question so we could try to keep this right about a half hour.
Yeah, again, just a reminder that a lot of these NACLQ teams have still yet to be announced. I believe that a lot of the top teams have been announced, which we have already started talking about. But just to be clear, We will get more information as the signups continue and as more announcements are made online. So keep an eye on social media. We'll try to retweet as many of the announcements as we can to make sure you all are up to date. But our final question, which we're going to keep very brief because there's not a whole lot of information. It's a very developing story. But a couple of really last minute roster changes have happened to some of these NACL teams heading into week 1. First of all, we're going to talk about TSM challengers who have found a mid laner in Doxa to sub in, as well as CLG Faith, who are making the temporary roster decision of subbing out BMFX, moving Sketch from support to ADC, which was his previous position in the past couple of years, and adding Plux to play alongside him. Again, Sketch and Plux played on Cincinnati Fear last year as a bot lane and looked pretty good in PGCQ. So those are the big changes that are going to be happening going into this first week of play. What do we think about this, Hawk? Does this change your perception of either CLG Faith or TSM challengers?
So like, definitely, to answer the question immediately, no, it doesn't really change my perception of either of these teams. It does a little bit, but not a lot, especially TSM. I think having Doxa come in, first of all, great for Doxa. I think he's one of those players that for a while, a lot of people were like, man, can't believe Doxa's not playing Academy. Well, now he is, even though, or rather Challengers, NACL. Even though I will say Summer Split, I think, was a little bit lackluster for Doxa. I know all of EGP, there was maybe some things there, but so I'm excited to see Doxa now going into NACL, though. I want to see what he does. But the big one for me is this CLG Faith one. Sketch was, again, going to roll swap to support. An AD carry, by the way, that I think a lot of people thought could be an NACL, just as an ADC.
Yeah.
But is roll swapping to support. And shout out Myra. I actually, after the roster was announced, I tweeted about the CLG Faith roster. I was like, wow, Sketch is support. That's kind of surprising. And Myra was like, hey, I can answer any questions that you have. And I talked to Myra a little bit, and she sort of said 2 things about Sketch. That Sketch is really smart and really flexible. And I feel like we've already seen this from his play at ADC. Sketch has been a player that's willing to bust out the Ziggs if he needs to. He can play weak side. He can play the super giga hard carries. And him and Plux really hard carried some games at as the bot lane for Cincinnati Fear, especially Summer PGCQ 1. Like, they would not have made it out of group stage, I think, if it weren't for how the bot lane played against Maryville. I would particularly remember.
Right.
So I am not worried for them as a bot lane. And also, I think Sketch's flexibility is what is going to make him great if and when he ends up going back to support. So,
yeah, and again, this is very developing news. And I believe Evie
it came out today at like 1 p.m.
right before we start recording, actually.
Yeah.
And I believe Evie also tweeted that they are planning on moving Sketch back to support at some point, and this is just kind of a temporary change until they have figured things out. Hope everything's all right with BMFX. Not entirely sure about the scenario that is going on behind the scenes, but again, just hope all these players are doing as well as they possibly can.
And honestly, the only thing that I think is like negative about this for CLG Faith is I was pretty excited to see Sketch get to learn from an experienced AD carry like BMFX, and obviously now that's not going to happen. He's going to be the ADC, and Plux doesn't have that Academy experience. So that's sort of like the one negative to come out of this. But obviously, I mean, we don't really know what's going on. Hopefully, as you said, BMFX is doing okay, or whatever may be behind the scenes. But that is sort of my take on the whole situation.
Yeah, and I think that just about wraps up the headlines. 5 questions, or 5 headlines, so to speak. And hopefully you're a little bit wiser and smarter about the way that things are going here in the North American developmental scene. But with that, it is about time to swap things over to the second part of things, where we will be tier listing everything and seeing how much we like these rosters. We're going to do that transition right about now. All right, here we are, part 2 of the first episode of Salty Runback. We have our tier lists all set up underneath us right now. They are covered up, as we don't want to reveal anything too quickly. But again, we will be tier ranking all 16 NACL teams that's in the main division of NACL, which will be starting this weekend, based on how we like the way that these teams have constructed their rosters. Now, Hawk, this is not a tier list of power ranking these teams in any way. It's more about kind of our methodologies for how we think that, different NACL teams should be built, and how much we like some of the players and how excited we are to see them potentially, take off and become some of these new stars in North America.
Yeah, we are doing our armchair GM ratings for this.
That's a good way to put it.
This show. So it's purely like how we feel the rosters are constructed. And I think, obviously we kept the tier list covered up because we don't need Twitch chat spamming like, oh my God, they think this, like, before we explain
patience,
it.
Everyone.
But
patience.
because we want to, I think, take the time to explain sort of what do we think makes a good roster. What are we looking for as armchair GMs when we look at whether or not a roster is constructed well or constructed badly, generally regardless of how they perform. And I do say generally because I think, Grapes, the one thing we did immediately agree on separately, but we happened to agree on it, was that challenger teams and provisional teams should probably be built differently.
Yeah. Challenger teams, of course, the way the format of NACL works, they are not in danger of being relegated. They are never potentially at risk of having their spot taken away. And so, in my opinion, at least, when you have a team like that, it is better to focus on developing talent for your LCS team within that roster that you're ending up building. You can also, if you have players that you think are talented and could potentially slot into that LCS spot, which was kind of alluding to some of the questions that we had earlier in the episode. I think that's also like a fair reason for having a player in challengers, specifically with 100 Thieves Challenger and Unforgiven at the bottom lane role. I think that's definitely a decision that makes a ton of sense. But overall, growing talent, developing talent, that should be the main point of the challengers team. Now, for the provisional teams, you have to worry about getting relegated.
Yeah.
If you are bottom 4 provisional teams, which is very, very likely.
2/3.
Yeah, because that's most of the teams.
You could be a really good team. You could not even be 4th to last place in NACL just if you're one of the bottom 4 provisional teams. You're in that
the most
list.
extreme case is if you finish 3rd place in the season, you can technically be put into the relegation tournament.
How insane would that be? That would be crazy.
Okay, like spoilers, I don't think that's going to be happening.
That's not going to happen.
But,
that's not going to happen.
For these provisional teams, winning is very, very is even more important, I should say. And so when we're deciding how much we like these rosters for challenger teams, I think we're both looking more at how certain players on their roster are set up to succeed and grow and develop. Whereas for challengers teams, I think we're looking a little bit more at how successful we think they are going to be and how likely they are to avoid relegation.
Yeah, and especially, like, again, it needs to be emphasized, this isn't necessarily a power ranking. Like, I've not rated the provisional teams based on how good I think they will be, but you've got to remember, developing talent is important, but you can't develop talent if you get relegated. You're going down the NACLQ, and someone else is taking your spot. And so when you look at it that way, and I think it's good because it encourages the provisional teams then to field competitive rosters and really look to challenge not just each other, but these challenger teams. So
right.
That's important. Yeah, go for it, Graves.
Yeah, and the last point before we can start bringing up your list, Hawk, is I think that, of course, developing talent in challengers is very important, but sticking 5 rookies onto a challengers team, I think, is also not the right move. You need to make sure that you have a mix of people that have been in competitive for a while, and also, if you are bringing up a rookie, making sure they have the correct infrastructure and people that have been around for a little bit. So I think a good mix of veterancy and newcomers is probably the best formula for making a challengers team. My personal belief is, if you have like 3 young players and 2 more like experienced players, that's a really great way to build things. I think overall most challengers teams were a bit more conservative in that realm, but that just comes down to wanting to make sure that their team is not going to just fall apart. And I can definitely respect that. So without further ado, Hawk, if you want to kind of reveal your tier list, show off some of the stuff that you have, some of the hot takes potentially, the floor is all yours.
So that's the perfect segue, actually, because before I even reveal my tier list, I'm going to just tell everyone what my criteria for this tier list was. And Graves gave me the perfect segue because above all, mine was about how well I felt they could develop talent, in particular by having a mix of veteran and newer players. So teams with entirely newer players, hey, that's hype, but also, like, I don't know how great that'll be for the development. So that is one of my biggest pillar right there. Like, were you willing to take some risks, but were you also willing to be more conservative? And that's also why, I didn't necessarily rate imports any lower than I did NA players, because getting a veteran OS player can sometimes be really, really good for a roster to be able to develop them, have them be a veteran force on that team. Also, like I sort of said, a willingness to build around names. General Sniper, right? If you've got a big name, you're willing to invest in a player brand. I rated that pretty highly. For provisional teams, the ability to not get relegated was important. And for challenger teams as well, this was pretty small criteria, but I did factor it in maybe a move a team up or down 1 tier. I factored in how well they complement the LCS team. Like we're talking about Svenskeren playing on TSM potentially if things don't work out with Boogie or whatever. I do think that matters and the ability for players to sub in. Not a lot, but it is relevant. And then also another thing that was very important to me was keeping players together that had success. And so I think we'll see some of that. So anyway, let me remove the rectangle. You can see the tier list. I've rated them from extremely pog.
You have to transition the
I have
to
transition. Boom!
There we go.
We can see it now.
Also, if you're listening on audio platforms, we'll probably post these tier lists on our
Mhm.
Twitter, as well as you just go over to the YouTube or Twitch really quickly and see what these lists are. We'll try our best to keep you guys in mind, but just if you do want to just see the full list, those will be available for you.
Yeah, and so so what we're looking at, I've rated them instead of A, B, C, whatever. That's boring. I went extremely pog to ... is my opinions about these rosters. So and it is worth noting for the top 3 tiers, I consider these sort of closer together than the 3 below them. I think the top 3 tiers are all rosters that I'm like, these are very well constructed, excited about them, but just to varying degrees. Thank you, very cool. I like it. Is sort of like, well, it feel like it describes itself. And then ... I'm a little bit suspect about. And so Grapes, I already know we have some differing opinions, but the big ones for me, Team Liquid Challenger and FlyQuest Fam are awesome. And I think Fly Fam, I will say, they're going to get a few points off on the one thing we talked about, which was ability to not get relegated. I have no idea how good this team is going to be because they have some unprovens. Actually, let me flash the rosters. So I like this FlyFam roster a lot because they've taken a very, very veteran bottom lane in Instinct and Sword, who I think are 2 players, by the way, that could be playing bot lane on any of these challenger teams and find success. And then they've paired it with Blaze, who has sort of been a breakout mid lane star over this past year of PGCQ. Goo, who is looking to have a comeback in the jungle. And then Lunacia, who is a top laner that, I'm going to be completely honest, I don't know anything about. They might be terrible. And if they are, then, well...
Well, you have them in extremely pog tier. So if you have somebody you don't know too much about, I mean...
No, but you got to understand, like, I think this is what it's all about, though. I think that taking a chance on a player, and also remember, Papa Smithy is the general manager of FlyQuest these days, and sort of presided over that 100 Thieves farm system that I was just praising earlier in the show. And similar to Kim Down getting picked up by Team Liquid, I feel like if Lunacia is getting onto a provisional team, there's a good reason why. And maybe they're not going to be the best top laner in the league. Maybe they're not going to be the next sniper, and that's fine. But I just think this roster is so exciting because of their willingness to pair sort of these different storylines, brand new players, redemption arcs, breakout superstar, reliable bot lane. And I think if we're talking about developing talent, this is a team that can definitely do it. And while, yeah, they might, I could see them finishing bottom 4. I'm just going to be straight up. I think AoE and Team Liquid First are going to be the 2 teams that aren't fighting for relegation. I'm just going to say that. I think they're the only 2 that are really clearly a cut above. Maybe Wildcard. But I am excited about what FlyFam is sort of put together here. And if it ends up working out, I could see them going to relegation tournament, but most certainly not getting relegated and continuing to compete at this level and develop talent. And then for Team Liquid Challengers, I mean, they promoted 3 players last year, right? So now, hey, let's bring in a veteran OS import and Mir, or formerly Arthur, as many of you probably know him. APA, we were talking about it. I think he's one of the 2, like if you're looking at the next LCS stud, it could be APA. Arrow, veteran bot laner to play alongside this more rookie support in Kim Down, and then Bradley is Bradley. So I love what Team Liquid Challengers have put together. These 2 teams, to me, this is what roster building is all about. They've combined rookies and unproven talent with proven talent or like sophomores, if you will, in a really intelligent way. And I think that this is what I'm most excited about. I don't know. Grapes, any other rosters that you're feeling weird about, or do you just want to reveal yours and we could talk about it?
If there's any other teams you want to quickly mention, feel free to do so. If not, then I'm down to kind of go over mine as well. So
I honestly I feel like I kind of want to let you reveal yours. I explained the two that I'm by far the most excited about. The
Okay,
other ones like are just slightly more negative. So
my last question before I
all right,
kind of
hit me,
show off
hit me.
where I have these teams have. You have Fear all the way at the bottom. You wanna try to get into that a little bit?
Okay, yeah. So Fear basically to me is a team that has been constructed of players that like last year I feel like we would have seen go to the gulag and then lose in the gulag and then that's it. And so I think if that's what's happening, we're talking about like being that seventh best team. I feel like Cincinnati Fear has put together a team of players that are sort of that seventh best team. And that's no flame to any of the players. I love all these players, and I do think they're all great. And a lot of them, like Faisal, Shochi in particular, Perry did play a bit in academy. They are players that I would have been like, I think they could get onto an academy team. But I think they're players that would have needed the environment that, say, Team Liquid Challenger or FlyFam has fostered by pairing it with a really rock steady lane somewhere, someone to develop this talent. But also, I mean, Cincinnati Fear, I don't want to wade in too much on drama, but they fired their coach right before the new year as well. It's not really a great look. And so I'm just mainly, I said my biggest criteria above all, I wrote it in all caps, above all, mix of veteran and newer players. And while all these players are veterans and amateur, I think making the move together to the next level is going to be difficult.
Very fair. Kind of tiered things a little bit differently, I think, in terms of our qualifications. For these provisional teams, my highest consideration was like, can you win? Are you going to be good?
Okay.
Which I think is where we first differ between.
Okay, yeah, because
our
that was
ranking
my
of
second
FlyFam
consideration
all the way
for
up.
them.
And in terms of Fear, I think can be a good just chance to talk about their roster specifically. I think Faisal, Perry, and Shochi are all really, really good. They could all be on challengers teams right now. It is their bot lane that I am a little bit less confident about. I think Manui and Trevor have been around amateur for a very long time and have never found super high levels of success.
They've
Trevor
always
specifically,
been good. You know what I mean? Like they've always been
yeah.
good.
I mean, honestly, I think good. They've been all right. I think they've been very, very all right, honestly. Minui has been somebody that's been very highly touted throughout 2022. He was on 300 in the summer and then wildcard in the spring. Wildcard in the spring, I mean, that team didn't even make it out of the OQs in the second tournament, and I think it was largely through that bot lane play. When they made it to Proving Grounds, they subbed him out of that roster when they played in that Challengers team, and then on 300 when Minui was on that team, they also were very, very disappointing, I would say, in terms of how they performed in that tournament. And Trevor on CLG Faith, I mean, that team looked better with Lopali at support than Trevor at support. And
Yeah,
so
that's a great point.
I think that a lot of Trevor's success has been being able to play with, who was it, Scooped, I think?
Well, it was
with
Meech
With
in the
Meech, yeah.
spring
So Trevor and Meech were a combo for a long time.
on AoE.
And I think that once those two kind of got split up, it became clear that Trevor maybe not as highly talented as a support, and so I'm a little bit worried about how Fear is bot lane is going to perform, especially when Unforgiven is literally in the same league as them. So that is my biggest concern with Fear. But
and so
without
wait,
further
I
ado,
want to interject too because you're high on Faisal and I'm high on Faisal too. But I do also want to mention that I think the roles in which Cincinnati Fear are strong, especially top lane. I think that the top lane pool and NACL this year is stacked. And even though I think Faisal is really good, I think this pool is stacked. So that's what I'm going to say too.
Yeah, very, very fair. If we can pull up the tier list again, we can get into some of my rankings that I put together. I think the way we're going to structure this is I'm just going to kind of talk about some of the big differences that I have with Hawks rankings, if you want to transition that over right about now. So the biggest difference I think we have right now is that FlyQuest Challengers and FlyQuest main, FlyFam and FlyQuest Challengers are kind of swapped.
Right.
In our
Yeah.
list,
they're perfectly swapped, actually. I moved FlyQuest main this morning, by the way, just for the record.
Right.
So
we mentioned how I had considered, the fact that challenger teams need to win in order to be, a successful roster. That's why I have AoE in that A+ tier. I think that they are the best provisional team, and they are probably, at least the way things look right now, going to not get relegated. And that's why I FlyFam potentially like a little bit lower down.
I want to interject on this. Grapes, do you have AoE in your top 10?
I do not know. I really don't know.
It's not
so
a power ranking. I'll
leave
it. I'll leave it.
But yeah, FlyQuest challenges. Let's talk. Spicy drama in here, boy, everybody. Let's talk about FlyQuest challengers really quickly, Hawk, because that is where we have the biggest, I think, difference here. Fly challengers, I think, is a very, very good roster that they have put together. They have Philip, UG, Spyrax, Masu, and Winsome here on this team. And I'll pull up my notes because I definitely have a lot of good things to say. They put probably the most like new developing talent on this team, but they also have players that have played in LCS before. Philip and Winsome both have a split each in LCS. Winsome just coming from a really successful EU Masters run on Unicorns of Love as well. So these are not players that, you know, are super inexperienced or anything. They both have that experience on the top level, but they are, I think, still considered to be developing players. And so I think that all of these guys have really, really good upside. As well as just already being at kind of the top positions in the league. UG Spyrax, I think, was the best mid-jungle 2v2, or one of them. Maybe Armeo and Harry could have been considered with them as well. But, I mean, especially considering where they started off as very, very new rookies last year, they looked amazing coming into the summer split and into Proving Ground, specifically UG, who I think was a top 3 MVP candidate in the summer split. And so now they get another chance to grow. And then kind of the biggest wild card of them all here with this Fly Challengers team is Masu, right? So Masu, for those of you who don't know, played last year on TBA, which was a team basically consisting of the CLGF winning University of St. Thomas roster, but with Masu in instead of Shogo, because Shogo ineligible to play in PGCQ. And so the way that team worked is that Masu was very, very good on that team, but the way that the roster was constructed was that, you know, TBA had a kind of a weak side top laner in Topo, and they had one of the best, most aggressive mid jungle duos.
Kitsuo is a crackhead.
With
okay,
Kitsuo
I'm just like anyone that does not know, Kitsuo is a crackhead.
And so you kind of have, and then you kind of have them all feeding resources into Masu. He pops up in team fights. That's how TBA win games. And I think that this roster for Fly Challengers is constructed in a very similar way. I think Philip is basically a rock in that top side of the map, especially towards the end of the LCS summer split, was looking really, really good up there. And, you know, obviously Impact taking his place makes a lot of sense, but I think Philip definitely has some more room to grow, but is still a very, very talented player up in the top lane. And then you're going to have UG Spyrax just basically running around trying to help Masu get as much of these resources as possible. I think this is the perfect situation for them to slot in a new player like Masu for this team. And that's why I kind of have them ranked really high. I really like the roster construction. They might, you know, struggle a little bit at the beginning of the season, especially depending on like how the bot lane functions at the start. But I definitely like the way that they built this team. And I'm really excited to see them play. Okay. Yes.
Do you want to talk about FlyQuest Challenger now, or do you want to go through the rest of your tier list and then?
Yeah, I mean, I have some other teams up here that I think are interesting.
Okay, yeah, you can go ahead and talk about that then, and then we'll come back to FlyQuest Challengers, because I have thoughts too.
So in the A+ to A tier, I think all of these teams are very, very similar in the way that I like these rosters that are being built. What separated me, especially considering these challengers rosters, which is that the fact that I have Golden Guardians and CLG in A+, EG and TL in A, is that I put more value into I think that for me, if you're building a challengers team, keeping a strong core of your original players from the year before, and then adding a couple of new pieces is a really good way to continue developing talent. In a way,
what if you promoted 3 players the previous split, so you have to bring in a bunch of new ones?
Oh yeah, I'm saying you have to bring in new players, but in terms of like creating environments for
that's fair.
These players to grow, I think that this Golden Guardians team never really got the chance to show off their stuff because of all of the insane like roster movements that ended up happening with their team.
Remember in Spring Split when Golden Guardians Academy was playing leagues 6 days a week? They were playing an LCS, Academy, and Proving Grounds.
It was a bit rough for them, especially in the summer. But I think Concept, Array, and Prismal were the 3 pieces that I was most excited about. And I'm glad that they made the decision to keep them, because some other teams, cough, cough, TSM, did not make those same decisions to keep some of these players that, you know, were performing really well and had more room to grow. Same with CLG. They only made one change, which was putting Copy into the mid lane to replace Triple. I think that's a fantastic move. And it also, keeps Meech and Breezy together as a really strong bot lane. I really like them as well. And just kind of keeping that more consistent environment, I prioritize a little bit more in terms of the way that these are built. I think that, for EG and TL, while they both have, I think they are equally as exciting in terms of just like raw pieces on a piece of paper. Might have a little bit of struggle, just trying to, start to get accustomed as the season, like, especially starts off versus these other teams at the top that have more room to kind of grow. And now that I mention it, Hawk, you have EGA pretty low on this tier list.
So yeah, we have EG really similar, separate, and I do, just real quick before we get into that, I think we have CLG and Golden Guardians both rated in the same tier and for very similar reasons, where they kept good parts of their roster, and not just good parts, but I think parts that could grow to more. It wasn't just like, oh, these players are passable, let's keep them. But like, for example, Ray and Prismal and Meech and Breezy, these are two bot lanes that like they could be really good, and you could look to like promote them or sell them, and they're pretty young bot lanes as well. And so that's, I think, something I want to draw attention to. Also, Golden Guardians gets a ton of points for promoting young mid. I think young mid.
I love young. Good. Young is so good.
Yeah. Like and it's especially young got a lot better over the course of the year. Like, came in spring, was a little bit like of a mechanical god, but like, like a little bit all hands, no brain, like no flame, but like it's true. And then by the end of summer, he was smurfing on kids, and him and Winnie looked like they shared one brain cell. It was awesome. So, hype promotion right there for a young mid. But yeah, okay, EG. So I really want to hear your logic behind this, because I'm not hype about this EG roster at all. Look, Soul and Shaden,
really?
I think, are two amazing pickups. I want to say that. Soul and Shaden are like, I'm really high on them. So let that be known. But look at the bot lane grapes. I feel like King and Smoothie are two players that have been proven, like they're like in the Fate God tier, where it's like LCS players that I feel like have been proven aren't LCS players, and they've been in Academy for a long time. Smoothie has been in the scene for forever. He was once in MVP caliber support. Now he's been lackluster in Academy for a little while. King, in the same boat, has been on C9 Academy for so long, gotten pulled up to LCS a couple times when they've had like visa issues and never looked good. And Ryoma's pretty cool. I like Ryoma, I'm fine with. And that's not to say like King and Smoothie are bad players. And I also think they could be really good veterans on a team, but I don't know. When I look at good veterans on a team, I think there's a lot more hype people than King and Smoothie.
Man, Hawk, I think you're answering this question for yourself. I feel like you're kind of just ignoring the fact that Soul and Shaden are literally on this team.
Yeah, and I love them, but that's only 2 out of the 5. Like, a lot of the other rosters have way more hype about the whole 5.
Let me break this down for you. When I was considering these two teams, EG Challengers and TL Challengers, I actually see a lot of parallels in the way that they have built their roster. They have really exciting young top lane recruits that were in amateur last year and have, now made their way up to academy, up to top tier academy teams. That is Soul and that is Sniper. They have really young junglers that are both, very, very new. They're both 17, 18, I believe. Very, very highly mechanical. I think Shaden was one of the best academy junglers in all of 2022.
He was really good. Shaden could be in LCS soon.
Yeah. And so you have really, really cracked head, like really great young top sides of the map. APA and Ryoma are both mid laners that, didn't deserve to be playing in amateur last year, and it's really good to see them in that spot. You can make the you can have the conversation about, oh, APA was never in challengers before. Ryoma was and has been in LCS, but I mean, Ryoma was one of the best academy mid laners in 2021. You remember he won Proving Grounds in 2021 with 100 Thieves, with Luger and Poom, and then towards the bottom lane, I mean, the 80 carries for both of these teams are kind of just like experienced veterans. That's King and that is Arrow. And the supports I'm not as high on. I know you're higher on Kim Down. I'm not as high on Kim Down.
I like Kim Down.
And I'm not super high on Smoothie. But again, when you're considering that Soul and Shaden are on this team, having these veteran pieces like King and Smoothie are going to be important. I do agree that this is one of the teams that I ranked a little bit lower because of the fact that I didn't like like the whole conversation about like having 3 veterans versus 2 veterans. Maybe this is a little bit too many veterans. But this is still a really exciting team, and it's I think a really good spot, especially with Kelsey Moser at the head of the coaching staff.
That's true.
To help Shaden and Soul really grow into super talented players. And so
So
that's why I have them higher ranked than you, I think.
I think, first of all, I think EG Challenger will be pretty good. I do want to say that. I think this will be a good team. I am just, while King and Smoothie it's good to have veterans. They are the kind of veterans that I'm like, they just don't make me as excited as some of the others. And maybe that's just my own like perception bias, you know? Like honestly I might not have a good reason to say that, but I do think part of it as well, in a big thing that sticks out to me is Team Liquid Challengers, for example, right? They both have veteran ADCs, but the difference is Kim Down can directly learn from Arrow and Core JJ, right? Like they are going to be able to foster this new support talent. Meanwhile, EG Challengers, it's just going to be entirely about, like, if you're talking about developing talent, it's going to be about Sol and Shaden. And while, like, yeah, that could work. You could develop these players really well with the veterans that are on this roster. I feel like, I don't know. It almost reminds me of Golden Guardians, like 2020 roster, the one with Niles and Iconic, where they had like a bunch.
Oh, don't do that.
They had a mid and bot of like kind of like washed players, and then they threw the kids into the fire. So.
Rookie Ablaze Olive is a washed player, Hawk.
They had Rookie Okay, I forgot who their mid laner was, but
I'm high. I think EG's. I'm excited for watch EG's roster.
I'm excited. I'm excited, but I'm not inspired. But I like Soul and Shaden.
It's very fair. I think you have to try to consider what other top prospects are out there that aren't Soul and Shaden. Because I think that they're probably the two of like the top 5 prospects that are in this space right now in this league.
I mean that is fair.
That kind of that speaks for itself in a way.
I would agree. Like if maybe I think in general, maybe you're putting a lot of emphasis on like individual prospects, and honestly, I mean I said I would too in terms of like building around names. But I don't know. I feel like when I look at this roster of 5, if I'm a GM, I'm like, Sol and Shaden, grab them. And then it's like, all right, who are some people I can put around them? I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's a valid way to do things. You have these 2 young prospects, and you want to create pieces that, you know, are going to perform well, but also are here to, you know, help them grow as well. And so I think that's just kind of where we differ in terms of how we're ranking these teams.
Yeah.
What are we at? What are we on time right now?
We're at an hour 04, but we've taken a few minutes of break, so we could probably go for like another few minutes here.
All right. So some other teams that, you know, stick out to me specifically, 100 Thieves Challengers. I mean, I think that the way that they built is amazing.
Do we really? I don't even think we need to talk about 100 Thieves Challenger. Like,
yeah, just like really quickly, of course, Sniper Yukino, and then you have Unforgiven, who is like first team all LEC last year. I think you can still consider him a developmental piece after all that, because he is so young and kind of new to league, and so I think that this team is going to be really good. That combination again of building young players with some of the experienced players.
100 Thieves Challenger is a more exciting version of Evil Genius Challenger because their veterans are more interesting.
Hey, I have him ranked higher.
That's
yeah. I agree. I agree exactly with you. I think that is a very, very fair take. The other team that I thought was an interesting one was Dignitas Challengers. I think this one is a team that will perform pretty well in the NACL, but I'm not excited about the pieces that they put together. I think if you're building this team like a provisional team, this was a pretty good job by Dig Challengers, because you have a lot of pieces that I think are very, very talented. I think that Insanity, you know, is like one of those borderline LCS people. You have Tomo and Diamond on this team, who are kind of become like the staple academy tier bot lane, like always like that bot lane that you want to try to beat to get over that hump in a way. And I think that Hoon and XU are pretty good as well. I think XU is more exciting than Hoon, just because just based on some of their LCS experience. But like none of these players really stick out to me as having super high ceilings. You know, we've seen Insanity, Tomo, and Diamond.
I don't know.
A lot.
Insanity is pretty hype to me.
I think Insanity is the most exciting player on this team. I would not be surprised if he does end up in LCS at some point in the next year or so. But in terms of like how good they're going to be, I think they will be good. It's just that there's not a lot of like super exciting like new young pieces. They kind of just have a bunch of people that have been in the space for a while, if that makes sense.
So yeah, the way I sort of looked at Dignitas is I'm pretty excited about XU and Insanity. I'm not as excited about Hoon, Tomo, or Diamond. Especially, I gotta be honest, I'm really not that excited about Hoon. I think he's one of those imports that's sort of like, he got imported. He played in LCS for a little bit and looked really bad. I don't know. Yeah, I kind of agree. I honestly don't necessarily think this will be a top of the table team for Challenger. I actually would probably rate them bottom half, but I have them power ranked, so this is off the cuff. I think Dig C, I mean, yeah, thank you, very cool. I think their roster is cool. I think they've got some good pieces. I think they have some veterans, but overall, nothing inspiring for me. I think it's interesting. We all have Dig, Wildcard, and CLG Faith in the same tier, and I feel like and you've added Cincinnati Fear to this tier. I really feel like this could just be described as the tier where it's like interesting pieces, but overall uninspiring.
I think that Wildcard is a really interesting team to take a look at here if we want to do that really quickly.
Sure. We got a few minutes.
AoE Ginger Turmeric is the core team that this Wildcard roster was built from. They have Moose Hater, they have Keel, and they have Duo King. That team was the best the best amateur team in Proving Grounds, technically. They finished top 6. 100 Thieves Next didn't do that. Taco Gaming didn't do that. AoE GT did do that. Yeah. So if you're looking at just that, you have 3 of those players. Hell yeah, this should be a really good roster, right? But I think it's people might forget the fact that the 2 pieces that are missing, Captain Shrimps, I would think was very, very important in terms of playing that kind of like long range nuke style that AoE GT really excelled at. And then having Wixie just as like a super talented ADC. I think Lens is good. I think Wixie is better. And so when you're looking at wildcards, like kind of roster construction, I think that some of the big reasons why AoE GT was really good are missing here, which is why I don't have them a tier higher alongside teams like TL First and FlyFam.
So I want everyone to remember that Golden Guardians, Ginger Turmeric didn't make anything above a quarterfinal until Wixie came to the team. Or they made semis without Wixie and then he came on for PG. But for the most part, this team was pretty like mid top 10 in PGCQ for the whole year until they got really hot at the end of summer. So I think they're good, but I don't think that's going to happen again. I'm not sold on Moose Hater at all. He's really talented. Don't get me wrong, really talented, but I'm not sold on his play style as of yet. Especially, again, I've been talking about, like, I think top lane is looking pretty stacked this year. I think every single one of the top laners for the challenger teams, like, is a good top laner. You know, I'm like, there's no one here that I'm like, you know, like maybe I would have Hoon as the worst, but like I think Hoon is still good. So, I'm not, you know, this is gonna be a big, I think, test of strength for Moose Hater. And also, you know, I rate keeping rosters together highly, but at the same time, this Ginger Turmeric roster has been playing together for like over a year now, and I'm just like, I don't know. I wonder when they're gonna play on different teams. What will they look like? And does that make any sense?
Yeah, it's fair. I think specifically just like the fact that Wixie's not here really hurts this team.
And I think Wixie really elevated them. And the last thing, we're pretty much running out of time here, but the last thing I want to add too, you talked a lot about FlyQuest Challenger. I've got to defend myself for why I rated them lower. Look, I agree with everything that you said, except for the fact that, look, Winsome, good split on Unicorns of Love. Looked really green, though, when he played in LCS in 2022. So even though he has had LCS and like ERL experience, I think I still consider Winsome to be a really green player. Also, Masu, as you said, like super, super green. So I think this bot lane is like, they could be really good. And I think these are players, if you're looking to develop talent, Masu and Winsome are great pickups. But I am looking a little bit as like Philip, Yuji, and Spyrax, all experienced in the FlyQuest organization. Yuji and Spyrax, they play together. They're going to have that existing synergy. But I think Masu and Winsome might be getting thrown into the fire a little bit right here. Especially like FlyFam, they've got the Instinct Sword bot lane. That one to me screams consistency. I like it being on FlyFam because they'll elevate these younger players around them. And Masu and Winsome, they might be elevated by Philip, Yuji, and Spyrax, but the expectations just to me are a little bit different for these challenger teams. And yes, you should take risks. You should develop new talent. I fully agree with that. You know, you mentioned like TBA, they would just play like insane people around bot lane. I also saw Masu and Chookies get destroyed in lane a few times and make the game really hard for their team. Great team fighting brought it back, but they got destroyed in lane a few times. I also saw Winsome get destroyed in lane a few times, so I'm a little scared for the bottom lane.
That's very fair. Especially again, I think bot lane has a lot of really good options in NACL. I mean, specifically 100 Thieves, which is the team that I have next to them.
Great supports
yeah.
and good AD carries, but great supports.
Yeah, so overall, I think that's kind of a good overview of the stuff that we have on this list. I know there's a couple of teams that specifically towards the bottom that we did not get to talk as much about. If you do have any questions about where we're ranking things, please feel free to like add us on socials and everything, and we will justify why we have them here. But we are again running a little bit low on time, and I think that this is a good place to kind of wrap things up. First episode in the books, Hawk. How are we feeling about that?
Grapes, I'm feeling amazing. I hope everyone out there enjoyed as well. We've been really excited about doing this. We put in so much work on the front end. We hope that this is the podcast talent that all of you NACL and NACLQ fans have been hoping for. If you are an NACLQ fan, fear not, we will have more headlines for you next week when the games are approaching. Remember, only 6 rosters have been announced. It's not quite close enough to get super dug in on that. Please add us on all of our socials: YouTube, Twitch, Apple Music, and Spotify. That's where our podcast can be found. Add us on Twitter, message us, email us at saltyrunbackpod@gmail.com. All of our socials are at saltyrunbackpod. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to continue discussion. Add Grapes and I on Twitter. Message us if you have any questions. Flame us. Who knows? Colomer. I hope I'm still your favorite. Otherwise, NACL, it starts this Saturday, 1 p.m. Pacific. The first games are going to be bangers. It's on Twitch TV, Challengers League, and Twitch.tv, Path to LCS. So it's the normal Path to LCS stream, but of course, Academy has renamed to Challengers League. I believe it's all one word. The first games are going to be Fear up against Team Liquid Challengers. That's going to be an interesting one. And CLG Civil War. That one I'm really, really excited about as well. But with all that being said, follow us on social media. We hope you all enjoyed the episode. And hey, if you disagree with our takes, at the end of the day, take what we said with a grain of salt. We'll see you all next time.